Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann, flying solo tonight to cover the Breonna Taylor decision. It came down a few days ago. The city of Louisville preemptively declared a state of emergency, which pretty much gave away that they weren't going to register any formal charges against any of the three officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death. If you're not familiar with the situation for some fucking reason, she was an EMT. Police came to her apartment in the middle of the night, executed a no-knock warrant. Her boyfriend thought they were being broken into. He fired a shot. It hit a cop. They fired shots back. And Breonna Taylor was killed. But in terms of the decision on whether or not to criminally charge the officers involved, I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone. It fits a pattern of police killing civilians and receiving no legal punishment. And I'm not saying that as one of these uber Black Lives Matters fuck the police types. I like to look at the facts of the case. But no matter what side of the fence you're on here, either Black Lives Matter or pro-police, I think there's an inherent sense of tragedy that prevails, any allegiance to either side. I mean, I don't think anybody says this isn't a tragedy, but that's where the common ground seems to end. Beyond that, there's a line drawn pretty handedly in the sand. You're either supporting the police on this, or you're supporting, and I'm going to air quote this, justice. And I don't mean justice in the sense that the laws and technicalities of the situation are given proper consideration and respect. I'm talking social justice. The kind where nothing short of utter destruction of the involved officers' lives is enough to satiate the public's desire for recompense. So let's just get this right on the table. For the record, police were fired at first and then responded in kind. So this is a matter of the police's right to return fire when faced with deadly force, which they were. However, it's important to note that Kentucky has a castle doctrine related to a stand-your-ground law. So, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend that was on the premises at the time, Kenneth Walker, he thought he was dealing with intruders. And due to the no-knock warrant and plainclothes garb of the officers involved, I think I can see why he thought that. The police thought they were dealing with a violent threat, not a civilian defending themselves, when the first shot was fired at them. And that shot had struck Officer Mattingly in the leg, nicking his femoral artery, an injury that could have proved fatal. So as soon as the first shot goes out, police then bang, 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 fired a shit ton of shots. 6 of them hit Breonna Taylor, and then she died from that. And I'd just like to bring up that very few people are explaining how this relates to the force continuum. If you don't know what the force continuum is, let me tell you. The force continuum is a standard that police use when faced with varying threat levels. They then respond with varying levels of force that are always supposed to be equal to or greater than the threat that they face in an effort to stop any threat of harm to the public or themselves. So these officers, they were faced with deadly force. Therefore, it would make sense that they would respond with deadly force, not, oh my God, we're shot, let's get the fuck out of here. So let's say that this would have been a regular hours, daylight type of operation. The police would knock and announce themselves. A shot would ring out and strike the officer. That's a use of lethal force. And it would be perfectly acceptable by law and police training for them to return or respond with lethal force themselves. No matter whether it was that hypothetical scenario or what actually played out, Miss Taylor's death is still equally as tragic. And I'm sure the court of public opinion would have still had a shit fit if this would have played out in daylight hours and she would have been killed then also. But if you can be objective and see this for what it was, law enforcement attempting to search the premises with a warrant, what is the issue? Other than that she died, if she doesn't die, if no shots are fired and they kick in the door and they go in and they toss the place, would you be so upset? No, because you never would have heard her name. It would have been another attempt by law enforcement to raid an address that was a part of a warrant they were executing, looking for drugs or any sort of proof of criminal wrongdoing. So that warrant that they had, it was a no-knock. So they don't have to go, police, open up. They just fucking kick in the door. A judge had to approve the warrant that these officers had. They weren't going in rogue, guns blazing, looking to serve vigilante justice. The reason that this warrant was written for no-knock status was because the officers were concerned that, like many other drug raids, the evidence they're looking for may be flushed in the flurry of entry and execution of the warrant. So in the panic, in a raid, people will run the fuck out of there. They will eat drugs. They will flush drugs. They will try to destroy any evidence so that even if they're arrested, there's not enough substantive, collectible, physical evidence to use against them at trial. Shit, I can tell you from experience that working in the jail, I asked one time why so many of them slept with their shoes on. They're like, oh, apparently you've never been raided in the middle of the night. And I'm like, no, I have not. Why? And they said, if the police kick in your door and it's a raid, you got to get the fuck out of there. So you already got your shoes on. It's just out the window, out the door, however you can get out. Doesn't matter. And it makes sense if you're a criminal, but sad that you get in trouble that much or that accustomed to police presence looking to find you doing something wrong, that's how you live your life. Another reason why these no-knock warrants are used is because surprise police presence does not give anyone inside a potential raid site time to arm up and respond violently. You're catching them by surprise. So unless they're sitting there with a gun in their hand or a knife, it makes sense from a law enforcement perspective. And the public's never going to admit that, especially when there's collateral damage. Police lives are worth more than the public's because technically they're not. You're all human beings. It should be a level playing field, but we give this level of responsibility and authority to law enforcement organizations, and their number one rule is everybody goes home safe. So officer safety itself is paramount amongst all other standards of safety. You have to use force. You have the authority. The police are told they have to do what they need to go home safe and apprehend whoever they're looking for or trying to catch as best they can. So why, again, are you shocked that shit like this happens with the death of Breonna Taylor? Shouldn't be. Now, this is taken directly from a New York Times article about the situation. Quotes here, the police had been investigating two men who they believed were selling drugs out of a house that was far from Miss Taylor's home. But a judge had also signed a warrant allowing the police to search Miss Taylor's residence because police said they believed that one of the men had used her apartment to receive packages in the past. Miss Taylor had been dating that man on and off for several years, but had recently severed ties with him, according to her family's lawyer. Well, whether you did or didn't, the point is that you used to run with him. Guilt by association. That's why they were at your apartment. If you had not been associated with this deplorable piece of shit, you might be walking around today. And then a follow-up to that quote would be this one from the family's lawyer. Miss Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, had been in bed, but got up when they heard a loud banging on the door. Miss Walker said he and Miss Taylor both called out, asking who was at the door. Mr. Walker later told the police he feared it was Miss Taylor's ex-boyfriend trying to break in. That could be. It's a plausible scenario. But here you have the family's lawyer giving a statement saying that Miss Taylor and Mr. Walker awoke to the sound of pounding. So this was supposed to be a no-knock warrant, but police knocked. And then he thought they were breaking in. He shoots a bullet. They shoot at least 15 back. You know how this ends. Now fast forward to the settlement portion of this that has been solidified in the last few days. The city of Louisville is awarding $12 million to Miss Taylor's family and also discontinued the usage of no-knock warrants. That's a pretty big step right there. Not the money, no more no-knock warrants. They've acknowledged they don't think that it's a safe enough tool to continue utilizing them. Will it be this way forever? Probably not, but in the interest of calming the nerves of the public at large that is furious, they're going to do away with them for now. It's also worth noting that while Miss Taylor's boyfriend, Mr. Walker, states he never heard police announce themselves, the officers involved claim that they did. And that's kind of an important devil in the details piece of info. I mean, it's a moot point now due to the outcome, but think about that. It's a no-knock warrant. They don't need to announce themselves. They just kick in the door, and they go in to find out what's going on inside, and if the people they're looking for or anybody associated with them or evidence is available at that site. So you've got the family's lawyer saying there was pounding. You've got the police saying they announced themselves. It might have been a no-knock warrant executed in nighttime hours, but it sounds like they did it like it was daytime practices. So that kind of covers the cop's ass right there in terms of why there was no indictment for, quote, murder, which I just want to point out, murder is charged when there is intent, and there wasn't one. That's the fucked up part about this. It's kind of this perfect storm of tragic circumstances. Nobody went there and goes, hey, we're going to knock and then we're going to kill somebody. If Kenneth Walker doesn't fire that first shot, odds are the police don't fire any shots. They might bust the door in, and it's a scary scenario. But then maybe nobody gets shot. Miss Taylor's boyfriend had a legal license to carry that firearm. So there's no illegal gunplay here. Once again, absolving the parties inside the apartment. But the court of public opinion has sounded off and think the use of force was unjustifiable. Only one of the 3 officers was indicted at all and fired, and this is because he blindly fired shots through the blinds of a door into the apartment, which, per their policy, they're supposed to have a sight line, and then the bullets went through the wall of an adjacent space where a pregnant woman, toddler, and man were sleeping. So this could have been like way worse than it was. Thankfully, it was not. But that's where the 3 indictments against Officer Hankinson do come from. Those 3 individuals in the adjacent apartment. I find it interesting at the least, a little disgusting at the most, that they didn't consider an equal charge of that in regards to Breonna Taylor herself, because if the patio blinds were drawn, he couldn't see inside, and then he just fires in, that's the same level of wanton endangerment, which is what he was charged with, in regards to Miss Taylor's life as the other 3 individuals. But as it turns out, from what I've read, Officer Hankinson's bullets weren't the ones that struck Breonna Taylor. Those belonged to Officer Cosgrove, the 3rd officer on the scene. For my money, I like to propose alternative strategies that could have been employed in these types of situations when I cover them for the show. So here's what I would have done, and that's going a different route and making it a knock and announce / daylight hours warrant. You could have gone the next day once the sun was up very early in the morning and done this. I don't feel whatever you're looking for at that late hour of the night would not have still been there in the morning, especially if you show up at like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. And honestly, if the drugs get flushed, oh well, try again another day. No one presumably dies in that scenario, nor would it be as dangerous to send an officer to the apartment undercover looking for Miss Taylor's former boyfriend. I mean, you knock and ask. He isn't there. Then you see if you can get in anyway via conversation with Miss Taylor or Mr. Walker if he's there. And then depending on their level of cooperation, you either just outright leave empty-handed or you drop your cover and offer her to provide information on the whereabouts of who you're looking for. She could be a confidential informant. It could have worked. Doesn't seem that Miss Taylor was a bad person who would be unwilling to assist in the administration of justice. This is a woman who was an EMT. It sounds like she was an upstanding member of the community. She may have dated a guy that had a rap sheet and dealt with drugs, but I can tell you that I have dated people that have used drugs, or I found out in the past sold drugs or did drugs. So many people in this nation get high and peddle a little bit of this, that, or the other. It's almost impossible to meet someone who has no connection to someone else who operates in illegal narcotics, whether by using or selling to some degree. I will say that confidently. And anybody that tells you they know no one, holy fucking shit. Mark down the date and the time and go have them buy a lottery ticket. I just want to add that in terms of police raiding a joint, I mean, I have a story I've told on the show before.
The Beast
has a friend who was married to a guy years ago. And the guy did drugs, but some junkies got in trouble that knew him and dropped his name to try to get out from underneath a rap they were facing. So some local junkies told police that this guy sold drugs. And then the drug task force showed up to his house. They knocked on his door. He was home alone. They announced themselves. He looks out the window and sees it's the cops. And then he shouts out, "Please don't break down the door. I'll let you in." As soon as he gets done saying that, they shattered the all-glass storm door. They busted in the front door, and that knocks him back onto the stairs. Thankfully, he's not injured, but it just goes to show how robotic the response of law enforcement can be. I don't know if they're like, oh, he might have a gun, which is a perfectly acceptable thought, mind you, but it sucks when you're on the receiving end of something like that. Because how many times have you heard about someone being swatted? Which, if you don't know what that means, somebody calls in a fake threat to police to an address of somebody else. And due to the nature of the concern and the words they use, a literal SWAT team descends upon the address with force and ready to fire. So the task force goes into this guy's house. His son, who was like 2 at the time, and his wife aren't home. They found no meth, no heroin. All they found was a little bit of weed. But that didn't undo the damage to their home or clean up the house, which had been tossed, and I mean fucking tossed. They pulled out drawers, emptied them onto the floor, cut open mattresses, left nothing untouched. So this is what police officers looking for drugs will commonly do. They don't care about your shit. They have one goal in mind, and that is finding whatever they can to use against you in a court of law. It's a sad side effect of the war on drugs. Bottom line here, this episode, a woman is dead who didn't have to be, and no amount of Black Lives Matter or celebrity vocalization will completely change the police to disregard the force continuum going forward. And as much as it pains me to kind of paint the situation like I did, the perfect storm of unfortunate factors, that's what led to this end result. Of all the situations that have gone on in the last year, this situation with Breonna Taylor is the most unfortunate. Sorry if that rubs anybody that hears this the wrong way, but I honestly feel this is the most unfortunate. Her boyfriend that fired the first bullet that set the entire incident into motion was legally owning that firearm, had stand your ground law behind him, and a legally registered firearm. Cops follow protocol, so there you go. It sucks. Doesn't bring her back. That's why we use the phrase, say her name, Breonna Taylor, so nobody forgets. And let's hope that Louisville isn't destroyed in the process the way that Minneapolis was with George Floyd. Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call? That is at What Do We Call It. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann. And that's the end.